Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Sornex, as always, for having me. So I realized this morning, before I get into it, I have to apologize for something from my athletic past that I may have indulged in. So for those that don't know, I played sports for a long time. I used to play with Bert, and we used to drink what was called shoe leather coffee. It's where you run it through the grinds a couple times to get the most caffeine. We were college kids. But what I'm realizing is I also drank a bunch of Strike Force and a bunch of coffee. So we got Strike Force, and I took Alpha Brain. So we're going to either have like Alpha Force or Strike Brain. It's going to be one or the other, so we'll see what happens today. But the one thing before we get into the presentation that I always talk about is the fact that when I get into a presentation, I have a tendency to roam around a little bit. And when I roam a little bit, I may get really close to you and I may not be looking at you, and I apologize. It's a bit of a nervous tick that I have and a bit of a cerebral thing that I do. So if I'm standing really close to you, don't be weirded out by it. It's just my rhythm of things. But today what we're going to talk about in my presentation power tools is in my 4th year with the Sornex family doing these types of presentations, I've had an opportunity to sort of cover a bunch of different topics. But as the 4th year came up, which I think is quite an honor to have this chance to speak to you all, I realized that I needed to be a little more open and honest about the path that I took and some of the lessons that I learned. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I went through as an athlete, how I got from A to B, some of the experiences that I've taken away, and some of the things that I went through to get here. So it'll be a little looser presentation than I've had in the past, and hopefully even at the end we'll have some minutes left and we'll even do some question and answer. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay. So my journey into athletics and eventually coaching started a little unorthodox. To be quite honest, it started with a pretty good lie. And it's a lie that I got to tell in a very unique way one day to the very people I lied to, and it brought me a lot of joy to do so. I lied to get into university. And it wasn't a small lie, it was a medium-sized lie. But I didn't lie on purpose. I lied because they asked me a question that I didn't have an answer to at my young age, and I panicked and just made something up. We've kind of all been there. The only difference for me is that I told a lie on a telephone to a coach in northern Idaho, and 21 years later, I found myself in a unique situation on a small island in the Indian Ocean. And on that small island in the Indian Ocean, I was helping apprehend a Maldivian diamond thief. We actually escorted that diamond thief off that island on a garbage barge. And he just disappeared into the ocean. But I started with a small lie to get into university, and I ended up escorting a Maldivian diamond thief off an island because he stole a diamond from the daughter of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That's just how dots connect in life sometimes. And that's how my dots connect. I can't say it's going to be that way for everybody, but it sure was that way for me. So when I started this whole process, I realized that along the way, there's only so many things that you can control. So when I started the process of athletics, I picked up the phone and I called a university, a small university. We call them junior colleges, right? Because I didn't have the academic background coming out of Canada. I'd never written an SAT. I grew up in a small rural area and I had no other way to get into the system. So when I called North Idaho College in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho in 1996, I picked up the phone and I said something really simple. I said, "Do you give athletic scholarships?" And by coincidence, the head coach, who rarely was ever in his office, and I would learn years later was never in his office, happened to be in his office that day, picks up the phone, and he's like, "Indeed we do. What do you do?" Well, there's the lie. Because I didn't know. I'd been an okay high school track and field athlete in Canada, My marks would not raise any eyebrows. They were pretty marginal at best. I was a 155-foot, 12-pound hammer thrower, and I was maybe 165 in the discus. So he said, "What do you throw?" I said, "I throw the hammer." He said, "How far do you throw it?" Realizing he was asking for a 16-pound mark, I said I threw it 155 feet. Now, for those that have ever thrown the implements, say a shot put, a 12 to a 16, you're making a pretty bold statement when you can say that you can repeat your 12-pound mark with the large implement. So he's like, "Wow, that's amazing. It's better than anybody we got on our team right now." And I'm like, "Oh, no kidding. So what do I do?" And he's like, "You should come down for a recruiting trip." So I got in the car, drove south, end up Coeur d'Alene, Idaho a couple hours later. What I didn't realize walking into this situation from small town Canada was that I was going to be introduced to two people that day, Bud Rasmussen, Bart Templeman. Bud Rasmussen was a high school English teacher at the time. What I didn't realize is he too was just starting his athletic career as a coach. He would go on to coach a 2008 U.S. Olympic throws team. But I didn't know this and he didn't know me. So there was a lot of things that we had to discover together in this process. The very first thing we had to discover is who each other was. So we introduced each other. He's not very impressed by me. I'm just a wide-eyed, naive kid. You know, I'm 42 and I'm still mixing Alpha Brain and coffee before I give a presentation. Not much has changed, right? So I was a little haywire. I was probably all over the road. But the one thing that I was an empty receiver of information. I was a radio station. I was radio station me, which you should be radio station you at this point. When you're starting down the road of athletics or education or any sort of adventure into becoming something that you dream about being, you have to start to realize very early on that you can't split your frequency with a lot of other things. For me, I had to become a single station, radio station Derek. In that process, I could only receive information. I didn't have anything to give back. I was this completely clean slate individual that was out there just to get better. So I meet him and I take it all in. They look at me, they have a conversation, they give me a scholarship. So now I'm in a situation. I'm going to a university in the United States on a lie, and all I can do is feel the overwhelming pressure of expectation that I've now put on myself. But the thing that I can control more than any other variable in that situation is the fact that I can control how, where, when, and what I do with my time. So I became focused singularly on trying to prove that I hadn't shown up on a bit of a misstep or a misfortune to get there. It haunted me a little bit. But at the same time, my mentality was fresh and ripe for any experience. So I became an empty radio station that only received information from one direction, and that was from my coach, Bud, and my other coach, Bart Templeman. At that point, and especially at that age of development, you have to realize you can really do nothing wrong. You can only progress forward. So that's exactly what I did. They gave me information, I did my homework. The more homework they gave me, the more information I tried to retain. In that process, I didn't try to coach anybody else. Back then we didn't have social media, so I wasn't sharing performances. And this is a key thing you have to take into consideration. In the early developmental stages of an athlete or learned person, and you can be learned and an athlete simultaneously. It is the same thing. One is a physical manifestation of a learned state. The other is a psychological manifestation of your learned state. A doctor is the manifestation of his textbook. An athlete is the manifestation of his coaching. Okay? So when you look at it that way, you're an empty slate, and all you can do is work towards that process. I didn't share anything. I didn't go to camps or clinics as a freshman in college and try to teach what I was learning. I wasn't like a PT or a personal trainer that takes a 3-week course 2 days after they join the gym and start teaching other people. That wasn't me. My sole focus was an individual progression of self, driven by the fear of being caught for telling this lie, but because I only had one goal: go to the United States and win. That's it. That was my only goal. It was that simple. I would go to bed every night thinking, dreaming, driving this idea that I would be successful. I would get up every morning and I would take these three things into account every single day: neurological, physical, mechanical. That's it. Every day, that was my focus. Neurologically, I would try every day to be better than I was the day before with the central nervous system, learning new mechanics of movement, learning to understand the coaching style of Bud, learning to put it into application so that I could be a winner when the time came. Physical was showing up present every day. For 2 years, we trained 6 days a week on an unorthodox schedule. Our schedule was so unorthodox that because he was a high school teacher and we were borrowing time, we trained in a gymnasium from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. That was our track and field practice schedule. And then we lifted after. Every day. Still had to go to school in the morning. In that 2 years, I was never sick, I was never injured, and I never missed practice. In that 2 years, I was both sick and injured. Never missed practice. But in my mind, I never missed practice. Didn't matter how I felt, didn't matter how I was moving, because I had this looming consequence of a moral dilemma. I told somebody I could throw 155 feet with a 16-pound hammer. That played into my routine every day. I didn't focus on anyone else. And it sounds selfish to say that. It does. But let me tell you, to be extremely successful, there has to be a moment in the beginning where selfishness overrides all else. It sounds harsh. In our social media world, it sounds like that's impossible. It's true. The majority of extremely successful people do things when no one are around that makes the difference between that and everybody else. People don't think about that because they think everything's online and everything, so that's how that person is every day. It's not. It's when nobody was around. I mean nobody. The mental warfare you play on yourself, it sounds harsh to say, but it's true. The demands that you put forth each day on the self to be a better self, that doesn't happen when you're surrounded by people that give you nothing but joy. That's just a fact. When you're around those people, that's where you get to interact and you get to have those moments of positive inspiration that will carry you forward. But the truth is success happens when all that peripheral noise goes away. When it's gone and it's silent, that fucking voice in your head is like, hey, you're a failure, you're a winner, you're going to be a champion tomorrow, you can't do it. That's the voice that is making the difference between success and failure. And we all have it. We all have it. Some of us, it may only happen for 10 minutes a night when you lay your head on the pillow. Some people, it happens in the shower first thing in the morning. They question their day before it starts. But that part of it is monumental in long-term success. The reason being is because that's where you're programming the neurological connection to everything that we're doing. That neurological is telling your body if you're a winner or a loser. People don't think about it that way. But your mind is telling your nervous system whether or not you're a winner or a loser. Your nervous system starts to manifest that in real time, winning and losing, right? So if you're always programming with a shrunken self and a shrunken mind, your body manifests into a shrunken variation of that. So at that time in my life, because I kept things so simple, I always reiterated a neurological plan in my mind of self-belief and achievement. I've spoke about it in the past. I believed in things that did not exist. I saw things that had not happened. I wasn't a fortune teller. I was telling myself that that's what I was going to do. What drives that can be a million things. It can be fear. Fear is a great motivator at times because it makes you accountable, but it will drive you. Excitement, love. Fuck, I'll be honest with you. Fear drove half of my career. Fear of failure. Love for winning drove the other half. But it took me a long time to figure out it was a powerful motivator in its own right. Loving to win. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being the fucking best guy in the room. There's nothing wrong with, our girl, sorry. Where is she? She was not going to kill me for not mentioning the ladies. right? To be the best human being in the world, there's an amazing thing to that. But it starts with neurological prepping. From there, the physical is just a manifestation of the mind, and the mechanical is the tactile, everyday stuff. Going to practice, turning in circles, running with a football, lifting barbells. But you have to have all three, and you have to do it in the beginning when you're learning from a very selfish state. Because if you don't, your progressions will be very, very slow and very staggering in their forthcoming. This is an area that gets... Okay, so when we talk about the fringe, there's people that understand the fringe, right? Bert understands the fringe. Rudy understands the fringe. Ollie understands the fringe. Athletes in here I haven't met, you understand the fringe. We get it. It's everywhere. But what is the fringe of human performance, psychological advancement, and using it in this scenario to overcome the lie and prove that I belong to be somewhere? Well, the fringe for me, and it's something that it's kind of weird to say it this way, and I just wanted to make sure I wrote it down right because it's really important, okay? Winners and winning mentalities are the minority of our society. There's a lot of people that will tell you that they're winning, will tell you they have the ability to be a winner, to have the ability to achieve beyond a level of success that makes up the majority. We know that that minority is very small. Now, we can make the argument, sure, there's only ever one winner. It's not that simple. Winners are the fringe of society that are always pushing against the ceiling that is unattainable. There are people that are not robotic. They can be impassioned, they can be community-driven, they can be social warriors, but they're pushing continuously against something that no one can feel, no one can see, but they can perceive in their mind that there is always something there that they're going to super exceed and get through. The fringe are the people in which that you want to surround yourself with as you're going through that process of development, either in a learned state or a physical state. You want to be around the smartest people in the room, the people that are asking the biggest questions. It doesn't matter if you're the smartest or not. I sure as shit wasn't. I went to university to get a degree in athletics. That's the truth. I skated through. I might even have lied to get back out the other end. True story. Probably won't tell it. But that's the reality, you know. I was a good talker. I don't speak Spanish, but I got 2 Spanish classes under my belt. So when I look at it that way, what you learn is you have to surround yourself with that fringe, with people that are going out every day and pushing that edge, people that are always looking for the little pocket through something that seems like resistance. What I learned in that first introduction to athletics, lying to get in, demanding so much of myself, fear of what was coming, what I learned in that is that a part of myself started to develop. And what I learned in that process is that unusual people have a tendency to end up doing extraordinary things. Ordinary people do not. And it's kind of a harsh but honest truth. Being somebody that has ordinary goals and an ordinary mentality towards things, you'll have a tendency to undershoot and underachieve because you're not allowing the part of yourself that doesn't exist, the dreamer in you, to take the big chances and try to perceive that there's something so much bigger out there. You have to be unusual. You have to be unique. I started to surround myself with the misfits and the fringe drivers and the people that asked tough questions and the people that showed up early and stayed late. I started surrounding myself with people in the beginning that all they wanted to talk about was back squatting. That's all they wanted to talk about. Good enough. I didn't know how to do it well enough yet. Back squat, let's talk about it again. 3 hours later, all right, I'm going home. That's how it was. Radio frequency me, information coming in, I did not care about any of it going back out. Not at that stage in the game. I lived on the fringe, I pushed, I trained, I was unorthodox. And in that same period is when I started to realize that I may have had some attributes that were going to allow me to have some success, regardless of what I'd said. And one thing I learned early on, and this has nothing to do from a physical therapy standpoint, this has everything to do with winning and losing. We all have individual strengths. Everyone's like, strengthen your weaknesses. Yeah, sure, okay, it's a general term. I'm a big believer in fucking strengthen strengths. The best champions I ever met in my life did something, or they had some characteristic about themselves that was completely different than everybody else. And the one thing that they did was they just kept putting fuel into their strength. If you have a voice that can sing and fill a stadium, you don't not sing. You strengthen that strength, and you use it every single day to make the best life that you could have. If you can public speak, you public speak. If you got an 800-pound back squat, you 800-pound back squat. Why would you do anything that didn't strengthen your unique individual talent that made you a fringe in the first place? Figure out what it is that sets you apart from everybody else, and you strengthen your strengths. Create separation between you and the common person, become a unique individual, and an incredibly demanding and hopefully extraordinary life. Do not settle for always focusing on your weaknesses. If I focus on all my fucking weaknesses, I'd never get up in the morning. True story, right? We're human beings. You know, I've had 9 surgeries, I've had an athletic career, I've had this, I've had that. If I got up every morning and was like, whew, what weakness am I going to focus on today? Weakness of life, that's what you're focusing on. Making yourself weak from the moment you get out of bed. Take your strengths and make them a priority, period. And I realized at that age, my strengths were work capacity and the ability to learn things rather quickly kinesthetically. I was a good athlete. Truth. Okay, I'm not going to deny it. It's a strength, right? I didn't get to number 1 in the world for a time because I was always focusing on weaknesses. I did things kind of sideways in my sport, and I got to the top because I made heavy shit go far, period, right? I knew it. So what I did is I realized I could stay longer than everybody else. I could tolerate, for whatever reason, more volume than most, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the way that it made me feel that hard, that grueling, hard, gut-wrenching, horrific driving into the dirt sensation brought me calm and peace. I've said in the past, I never ran from demons athletically. I never lifted weights to get rid of the darkness in my life. The darkness in my life was pushing against the dirt so hard because I'd trained myself to oblivion and being able to stand back up to the light. That is what I trained for. I didn't train to seek out and run away from things. I trained so that when I pushed myself up off the ground after a failure, there was going to be more fight in that fight, period. I wanted eyes on the horizon, I wanted to see championships, and I wanted to be better than everybody else. Nothing but win, forward, win. But as I went through this process, I realized that there was going to be some stalemates that I would run into. The human body needs ups and downs, ebbs and flows. Eventually, after you get through the fundamental development stage of any athletic or learned state, you realize that you're going to need a support system. You're going to need some sort of plan and structure to the way that which you're going to pursue this thing. And it was in about 6 to 8 months into my first year, I've been training and trying to make everybody believe that I was worth my salt for this program. I was getting better, but it was unmeasurable. I'd gotten stronger in the weight room. I was throwing better, but there was no way to really predict what was going to happen. And then we were introduced to a coach that came in, and he started to put structure to the madness. He started to teach us that any great success story, regardless of whether or not it is fabricated in the mind and still just a goal or a dream, or whether or not it is an actual tangible thing that is going to be repeated, what I learned was, and this is an incredibly valuable point, you can even apply it to your periodization. You have to have a destination in your training in which you can create a map from. We always and should always work from tail to head. Head, tail to head. Yeah, tip to tail. I might have said it backwards, so you can probably just, you know what I'm saying. So you always start at the end and work back. The reason being is so many people just train and move and think, and they always do it on such a in-the-moment presence that they don't have a long-term expectation. And eventually, as you start to clarify the goal and clarify what is happening in your mind, you want to start moving somewhere. And when you start writing that program and you start writing your goals and you start doing these things that are going to make you successful, you want to have an end point and work back. You know the Olympics are going to be July 15th, you work back. You know if the CrossFit Games are going to be X day, you work back. And you start to fill in all the pieces that you need to get there. And you start to do things fundamentally, but not in the very beginning. Even in the very beginning, everyone's like, well, everybody should have a periodized program, they're going to lift weights, and everything should be very sciencey. The truth is if I got somebody that doesn't know much about much, I want them to show up every day long before I ever teach them anything about where they're going. Get into the routine, get them into the concept, get them understanding that having them available, presence trumps all things in the beginning. Be present in the beginning and always move forward. Then as you introduce the structure does a couple things. One, it starts to create the image in which you're trying to achieve as an athlete, and B, it prevents injuries over time. Because it allows you to manipulate patterns so the pattern doesn't become so repetitive that it ends in injury. So always think in terms of the end to the beginning. Keep it simple. The only things that you want to remove as that athlete progresses psychologically, or as I progressed in that first year, training to overcome the obstacles of my own ambition, is you want to remove the dysfunction. That's it. Never focus on trying to change positive function. If you have a positive function and a positive progression, that should always just keep going. You only ever focus on change or negative dysfunction if something goes wrong, if technique breaks down, if training parameters change, if the athlete's no longer recovering, or if I wasn't sleeping. That's something I need to address. Don't focus on the things that are functioning perfectly. Just keep doing them, keep doing them, keep doing them. Everybody always has a tendency to over-talk about the things that don't need to be talked about. You only look for dysfunction, you hit it quickly, you move on. One of the things in that first year that I learned that was extremely powerful for me in my development as I was training is to separate the emotion from the physical of practice. Emotion for me, and you know, today's modern world, we got like beast mode and rage and all this crazy chit-chat that we use to describe training. Training for me was never emotional. And it's not that I'm a sociopath, I'm not Dexter, right? So it wasn't like I was showing up to practice and I was like, I'm a robot that's going to do this today. I was not that way. As you can tell, I'm not that way now. To me, I never attached myself to the process of training emotionally. I didn't have emotional conversations at practice, right? I didn't believe in it, even at a young age. But why didn't I believe in it? Because I always looked at the training, the learning, the process of getting to a goal that I had in my head as an endless toolbox of invaluable information. So if I was working with Bud Rasmussen, and hypothetically, Bert knew me back then, he didn't meet me until a couple years later, but if in 1996 I'm working with Bud, and Bud brought in Bert, but it's like 40-year-old Bert that has like a lot of knowledge, not like 20-year-old Bert who I would have known. So just kind of work with this. So if Bert came in and it's like, hey, here's the secret. We're going to teach you this, it's going to make you do this, it's going to go a whole lot better. If I was an emotionally driven training client or training athlete, I would have this moral dilemma. My moral dilemma would be, Bud is my coach. He is my light giver. He's the guy at this point in my life that's going to help me get forward. This guy's telling me stuff, but I feel morally torn between right and wrong of listening to another person. I was lucky to have a coach from the very first day of my training in the U.S. system was like, we don't do it that way. This guy knows a lot. He's going to teach you a lot. You're going to respect him in this moment. We're going to take what we can and discard what we can't. There's no emotion here. There's no ego and there's no attitude. He is another source or beacon of information. Utilize it to your best of your ability. Whatever doesn't fit us doesn't fit. Period. That's training. That's success. That is taking fundamentals from whatever source the fundamental comes from, utilizing it to the best of your ability to get to the end goal, which is winning. Period. Where's the emotion? Not at practice. I don't got time for emotion or practice, right? I got time for work. I got 2 hours with this guy. I'm not going to have a conversation about life. Emotion happens on meet day. Emotion arrives when competition exists. Emotion is waiting for you. Emotion is what makes you win or lose when you put it to work with your technique and preparation. You add emotion, which is fuel, emotion, which is adrenaline, and you can control it. Like when I started today, I couldn't control my adrenaline, but I like it because it makes me remember what it was like to be an athlete. Emotion's good, adrenaline. Shaky legs is exciting. I remember at one time in my life, every time I had an adrenaline dump, I thought I was having an anxiety attack, right? I was like, Jesus, what's wrong with me? Nothing. It's my body going, this matters. Let's rev it up. Either implode or explode. You got one or two options. Don't be an imploder, right? Trademark. But that's how it is. Emotion is waiting for you on meet day. That's when it matters. And that's when you can be pissed off when it doesn't go your way. You have every right to have that emotion boil over when you either underperformed because of a bunch of reasons or you got your ass kicked, right? And it's like, I always respected people that kicked my ass. I will say that because I knew that I was doing my best work. But I never liked it. And I sure as hell didn't go home that night going, yeah, I gave him my best. I went home that night screaming at the heavens, trying to rip the fabric in half so that I could find who was responsible and give him one. That's how I thought about it. Because that would put me back into the right mindset the next day to be what I needed to be. And that was accountable, present, and forever pushing forward. And in that process, I learned through keeping things very structured, showing up every day, eyes on the horizon, pushing against the dirt to get to my feet so that I could win. Doing these things consistently, I went from realizing that I was changing from being radio station me, the receiver of every piece of information I could get. I realized that I was starting to take on a little bit of a different role in that process. I realized that through that process of accountability to self, I was starting to show accountability to a group of athletes that I was training with. Younger athletes, new athletes, athletes that weren't as good, some athletes that were better. And in that process, one of my coaches said something really fundamental to me as we were progressing into the start of the season. And anyone who knows about track and field throwing events, you have to go throw on a cement circle. There's a plethora of issues that can go wrong, from wind and rain and snow, we were up in the Pacific Northwest, to mud and dirt. And I remember up until that point, I really had this isolated mentality. I didn't think about the collective of my team. I didn't think about the guys and girls that I trained with every day in terms of how they were going to do. I didn't have the emotional or mental aptitude to even do that at that point. It hadn't been turned on. But as it was starting to turn on, I had a coach, Bart Templeman, say something extremely important to me that in the big scheme of things, it's one of those statements that doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's like when somebody tells you, you'll see this all the time. Some coach grabs a kid and he's like, show them where the bear shits in the woods. And people are like, yeah, and they go charging onto the field. It makes no sense, right? Like, it's an irrelevant term, but people use stuff like that all the time. This was one of those moments. And he kind of comes up to me at the start of the track meet, and he's like, hey, you're doing really well. You're showing a lot of characteristics that we want to impose on kids coming in next year. I'm like, yeah, coach likes me, right? Felt like, yeah, I'm the man. And he just reached out and handed me a dirty broom. And I was like, fuck, I don't know what this is, but I got a dirty broom now. So now I got all my bags, all my shoes, and I got a broom. And I was like, I don't know what this is for. And he's like, you'll figure it out. That's all he said. And I was just like, well, I guess I got to carry this broom around, because Bart was an intimidating man. He was gigantic. He had piercing blue eyes that stared deep into my soul. So I was holding this broom, and I was like, well, I guess I'll just carry it. And I carried it for about 10 minutes. And then I saw an athlete that I was like, it's another athlete. I'm like, dude, here's the broom. Just hold on to this for a minute. So I just gave him the broom. He's like, what do you want me to do with it? And I'm like, I don't know. Coach gave it to me. You hold it now, because that's how you are at that age. And I remember standing there, getting ready to throw, have my shoes on, have my glove, hammer thrower. I'm ready. And it starts to rain and blow. And we were in this crappy area of Montana. And I'm like, this weather's terrible. And the ring was filling with a slimy mud. And I go in, I take my first throw. It's garbage. I almost fall down. At this point, Bart's coming in from another event. He's like, Derek, like, just stone face. Derek, what are you doing? I'm like, the weather's changed, coach. It's the ring's terrible. Just plethora of emotional responses. He's like, where's your broom? And I'm like, shit, I don't know, coach. I gave it to so-and-so. I don't know where they are. And at that moment, I realized the broom wasn't punishment. The broom wasn't this weird thing. The broom was the thing in which he gave to what he believed to be the leader of that group to care for and take care of his fellow teammates, so that you all had the best opportunity through increasingly unexpected odds to be successful. The broom, as simple and weird as it was a symbol of leadership. It was accountability in the moment, to clean off the ring, to keep things moving, and to make sure that I always had the best opportunity for success. In case anything went wrong, I had this tool, this obscure tool that I would use to stay ahead of my teammates. Because no one else at that meet had a broom. It was his experience. And at that point, something clicked. And I realized that carrying the broom and being accountable and being a part of a bigger collective and being a leader and learning leadership roles would introduce me to something that I would then have described to me by Charles Poliquin years later when I worked for him. And it was called a parking lot session. Some of you probably have used this term yourself. You know what it means. You go through the physical practice of training, but it doesn't always go well. And it's hard, and there's a lot of grind to it. But in that process, you do start to feel these emotions build up, and you suppress them and they build up, and you suppress them and they build up. Frustration, angst, you can't overcome, you can't achieve, you can't get what you wanted done that day. And after practice, you find yourself standing, leaning on a car, leaning on a buddy's car, and 3 hours goes by and you just talk about nothing. Talk about nothing. Talk about everything. It's a parking lot session. And I realized at that moment that there was another process to this whole athletic, learned process. And that was the interaction with other people and the ability to group think and share the things that you were not only succeeding at, but maybe not succeeding at. You maybe had fears that you couldn't deal with yourself, that you required another man or woman to share with, so that you didn't feel so isolated and alone in the struggles that you were going through to try to be the best at something that no one expected you to ever be the best at. Learning to actually communicate as a team, learning that leadership is being vulnerable. Leadership is going, listen to me. I'm fucking terrible in this situation. I'm going to fail right now in my head. And if I keep it inside, I'm going to fall on my face and everything's going to come to a halt. But if in that moment I turn to my teammate and I have that moment through shared communication and that bringing together through trust, that they can look into my eyes and I can look into theirs, and I can feel their hand on the collar of my shirt, and I feel my feet get light, and I feel my movement go forward in life, we all just fucking won a whole lot better. And we won because I was able to let down that shield and open up myself to the frequencies of the people in which had my best interests. But that takes time. You have to allow that process to develop. You can't just always be charging ahead and thinking that they're going to be right on your butt. You have to be ready to not only look back and let them know that you need a push, but you may have to reach back and grab them by the collar. That's leadership, right? We know that. That's what I learned in this first year. By the time mid-season came along, this word started to resonate more than any other word that I dealt with in my training. Seek. And if I could say anything to a group of people that are so open to the idea of giving their time for me to speak, I can only assume that you're seeking as well. And I'm seeking by being here. Seek the answers, seek the secrets, seek the seekers. That's what I started to realize. Seek the answers. I pulled as many pieces of information through conversation as I could from as many people as I could meet. It's never stopped, really. I'm always seeking something. And it's not because I'm lost. It's not because I'm on a journey of haphazard circumstance. It's because I'm seeking. What people have to understand is in a room like this where we have 400 people, I'm in a unique privilege because 400 people are staring in my direction. But over the next 3 days, I get to interact with 400 to 700 people, just like you. That's really why we're here. Seeking the answers, seeking individuals, seeking information that we don't have, seeking secrets. This is a big one. Actually taking the time to go after individuals and people, supplemental, nutrition, training, restoration, meditation, psychological programming, things I had no information on, the things that make the difference between 1% and 2% over the course of a career. The difference in some fields between gold medal and silver medal, other fields between living and dying, 1% to 2%. That finite difference between you and everyone else because you started to push the fringe, you started to seek the seekers, and you started to get answers from people that seek secrets. Say that time. It's 3 times fast. It ain't happening twice. I'll tell you that right now. Sometimes you just get into it. Whew, right? Seek the seekers. Okay. And when this begun to happen, I realized that myself as an individual had started to crumble away. And when I started to think of one, or the word one, I no longer thought of it as myself. As I was progressing through that first season, I realized what one was my team. One was North Idaho College. One was North Idaho. One was us as a group going to a national championship and winning. Any of us. I would do my best, my teammates would do theirs. I realized that tribalism, which now is just a catch-all term, right, for a lot of things, but it is a real thing. I surrounded myself with a group of individuals that had a like-minded interest in me. I realized I had a like-minded interest in them. We started to unify our belief system. We all started to show up all the time. We all started to think and train and move and believe in a concept that none of us had ever believed in before. The individual had become one. The individuals had become one. Group think and group activity is one of the most powerful things you can ever experience as a coach. When you can achieve tribalism culture within a unification of people, you will have a huge amount of success. If you don't believe it, just look around. Bert and his father have created it over time, taking the concept of one thing and turning it into a culture of belief. Sure, it's a business. They sell the best equipment. We get that. But we're not here lifting weights right now, are we? We're here having conversations with each other about something so much bigger. And that is turning the individual into the one. Unifying group think so that it becomes extremely powerful. At this point, I was also learning to activate my voice, learning to speak what I believed, to express what I thought. If I felt my teammates or myself were not living up to the standards in which I had set for myself, I would use my voice to do so. And I would use my actions to prove my voice right or wrong. Right? And in that process, it's actually something that John and I have talked about in the past from Power Athlete, is learning the difference between speaking and coaching, speaking and talking. Okay? In this process, I learned that conversations, regardless of the topic, were always going to end emotionally. Coaching and cues happen in the physical tip practice setting. This was huge for me. I learned that having a conversation was always going to open up my mind. When I was coaching, it was about points, 10 seconds, 3 seconds, information out. Afterwards, I learned that sharing and communicating goes back to parking lot sessions, team building, tribe building, expression of emotion, development of leadership and trust. But it has to happen outside of the execution of the moment. In the moment, it is about precision. Precision in the moment. The best example I can think of this, especially in my career, and the way that I always remembered it, was I'd always refer to it as stop screaming in the library, right? Two things that are so opposed to each other. The idea that if you need to show, teach, improve, and move better to have success, that you needed to keep things balanced. Conversations need to be consistent. Information needs to be similar across the board. Don't use your big guns until you need to use them. Don't yell at somebody unless they need to be yelled at. And this was what I was learning in this process. It was instrumental in my development at this time in my life because I was a one-way radio station. I was learning the frequencies of success. So through the course of this year, I learned the importance of the end by focusing on the beginning. I learned that I needed to go from being selfish and receptacle of information to a unifier of belief. And over the course of that year, I progressed. I came in throwing 155 feet, always thinking about the end goal, always thinking about tomorrow, always trying to perceive, to overcome, to try to do something I'd never done before. North Idaho College started me on this athletic road that ended with a Maldivian diamond thief. But in that first year at NIC, as I progressed through that year, following the fundamentals that I was following, I ended up qualifying that first year for the national championships, or the junior college national championships in Odessa, Texas. I was a 12-pound hammer thrower throwing 155 feet. I meet the future U.S. Olympic coach, who is an English teacher in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Coincidence. I show up every single day driven by fear, passion, belief, excitement, naivety. I just keep training. I become an empty, space for information to come in. I never questioned it. I never argued with it. I just tried to do it better. As I pushed through that season, by the spring, I qualified for the national championships. They were surprised. I was surprised. I was still afraid they were going to catch me in my lie. On May 15th, 1997, I competed in my first collegiate national championships. On that day, I threw 189.9, and I was the first ever national champion. It's kind of weird, because it's not sadness, it's just, fuck, I get so excited, because I see like 20 years of holy shit, and that's where it started. Like, that's how my brain sees it. It's like, how did this all happen? That day, I won the national championship, and not only did I win the national championship at 189.9, is I got to go on and do it 3 more times, and I told this story at my Hall of Fame induction. I told them I lied to get into their university, and I was the greatest winning national champion in their history. And that's a true story. But I did it because I just believed in taking the fundamentals that I needed to be successful, never questioning where they came from until I understood what was right and wrong. And I just listened to those that were willing to teach me the information that I needed so that I could keep leapfrogging through my career. And that Forrest Gumped me into the NFL, it Forrest Gumped me onto Team Canada, it Forrest Gumped me to the Princess in Saudi Arabia. And it Forrest Gumped me now to working with Zach Brown. It's just the fact of the matter, right? I don't know how, it's just what I do. But the one thing I can tell you from these fundamentals is that getting to this point in life is much a part of being exposed to as many people with an open psychology as possible so that I can take in as much influence as possible so that I can learn to use that influence to be a better leader to those that I'm able to influence. And once you start to realize that that is the process, you start to put down all these barriers. And when those barriers go down, your level of exponential capacity goes up dramatically. And that's really important. If I could give you one takeaway, it is start to be a lot more open to the information that is present from people that you may not even feel comfortable talking to at first, and learn to take that in, to understand it, to self-actualize it, to share it with your tribe, to see what sticks and what falls away, and strengthen your strengths. Always strengthen your strengths, because that's what makes you an individual in the end. We are all human, but we are individual humans. Some are tall, some are short, some can jump high, some can jump forever. But we're all individuals. And when you start to realize that, you have to strengthen your strengths. I can't sing, can't dance. I can dance a little, right? But I know what I can do, and I know what I was good at, and I strengthened it, flat out. So with that, I'll finish up in closing. Thank you for your time. As always, thank you, Sornex. And let's go ahead and do 5 minutes of questions, any topic you can imagine, and that'll, yeah, go for it, Jen.
Derek, with this.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
With this, how much do you see gratitude coming into effect? Because when you look at everything you did, you talk about the lie, but after knowing you for some years, you are one of the more grateful people I know.
Sure.
So how much does gratitude open those doors that gets you to the Maldives?
A perfect question. So the question is what is gratitude? And the best example I can give of that right now actually happened to me about a month ago. I've always tried to be extremely open to opportunity. And I was actually sitting with Zach Brown, and we're having a conversation just about life. And Zach said something very funny to me. He said that being successful takes a lot of people. You know, and we know Zach, he's a huge country star, so it's kind of as humble as he is, I was like, that's interesting. And it made me think. And the word that popped in my head at that moment was the humility of success. And I realized that throughout my life, all the most successful people I've met are extremely humble in their dealings with others that they incorporate to help them climb the pinnacle. There are going to be individuals at times that always deny those that help them up. But the really good people, the people that you want to be associated with, they will always acknowledge those that have helped them all along the way, that humility of success, the ability to be open to others as you climb that ladder. So that's where that gratitude comes from. It's essential. You have to be a gracious. Okay.
You made a great point, and I wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on what you said about vulnerability.
It's huge.
Huge.
It's huge. So vulnerability, or the ability to be vulnerable in circumstances of hardship, are fundamental. So what I've found in my life, and those that know my story a little more, you know I've lost the ability to walk twice in my life. I lost the ability once in 2000, still came back and was kind of successful after that. And the vulnerability of those experiences taught me, one, you have to be open to others. You have to reach out a hand once in a while, because if you don't, it's going to be not only an isolating life that you live, but a life that isn't very fulfilling. And vulnerability also allows you to get rid of some of that inhibition that is holding you back as a successful person. And that inhibition is that same inhibition in a very non-specific way as the person that's scared to go up and talk to a girl. It's the person that's scared to go out and just cut a rug on a dance floor because they're like afraid that someone's going to judge or comment. The ability to be vulnerable allows you to drop that inhibition. And I've never met anybody in sport, entertainment, writing, etc., that has the fear of vulnerability. For me as a writer, someone that has put out hundreds of thousands of words into the social media realm, some of them very deep, that vulnerability I lose when I do that because I'm putting something out to be battered and tattered by society. But what it does is strengthen me in the process, because I know that what I'm doing is a process that I believe in, and at the same time, I know that what I'm producing is getting a feedback that I can learn from. So if it's bad, I hear about it, and I can learn why it's bad. Why did I do something that wasn't something that I should be proud of? Why am I proud of something? That all came from that vulnerability state. Vincent.
You know, I think it's
Hey-o.
hot mic. I think it's pretty easy as athletes to have that drive and focus and, and develop how we go that route. But as injuries come, and then all of those skills that you built throughout that time, how do you turn that same focus and drive into the rest of your life when the physical ability fades?
Right. Well, and it's funny, because that's something that we've talked a lot about in the past. When I got injured in college, it was different than when I got injured as an adult even, is when we tend to get injured and we tend to have these setbacks in a physical world, it has a tendency to take away our identity. It's the same as individuals that get into a career that have all these complexities, but when that career comes to an end, maybe they're still quite young like an athlete, and they don't have something else to go to. High-level operating military personnel. They come back into civilian life, and it's much like an athlete at 32 that was at the NFL and now doesn't know who they are, because that physical identity had become so ingrained and so fundamental. It took me a long time to figure this out. You could argue that I've traveled the world, in a sense, searching and running from that very question. Because I was like, well, if I go to Europe and I lecture, or if I go work for the princess in Saudi Arabia, if I do these things, I will find a new purpose. But what I realized is I didn't need to find a new purpose per se. What I needed to do was to take the experience of everything that I had achieved and funnel it into individuals, even if I had to change the language in which I was speaking. If I wasn't going to talk about track and field and throwing and lifting weights all the time, at least I could take the opportunity to talk to people about the psychology, the emotion, the mental, and the hard work and the grit of what it took to be all those things. And I started to change the way in which I perceived what I was doing, from just coaching fundamentals to coaching the ability to be better coaches themselves. I learned that what I could be is somebody that seekers sought to be able to teach them the fundamentals that they needed to be able to actually improve those in which they're working at. And I started to focus on being more of a giver of an energy that was me and not just the fundamentals of a back squat or a bench press. Although we all like the back squat, you know what I'm saying? All right, one more question, we're out. Or no more questions, we're out. Oh, yeah, back over here. Ah, yes. Sir, you can stand.
Derek, one of your points really hit me because it's kind of the basis of my adult life from where I'm from. My fear of failure is far greater than my desire or drive to win due to the nature of my country.
Yeah.
Failure it's very different from failure in a first world country.
Yeah.
Is it healthy if I continue in that vein? If my fear of failure is
it healthy to live life without a parachute? Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I believe that. You know, so people don't realize he's South African. And there's not the structure, infrastructure, etc. in place to always pick us up when we fall. So his question is the fear of failure a healthy thing to pursue as life progresses? Yes, because tomorrow's not guaranteed. So if a fear of failure, a fear of letting things down, a fear of this consequence that could be much more detrimental is the driving force to you having a better life, as long as it doesn't become a detriment to the point in which you can't live life because the fear is too gripping and overwhelming to your soul. But if you can learn that that fear is a healthy motivator to push you away from the atrocities of the world in which exists around you, then you have to use that motivation because it may be the most powerful motivator you have to have the most blessed life that's available. But if you let go of fear, sometimes we fall into chaos. And people don't like to hear that because fear sounds scary. Fear is not scary. Fear is what gets us up in the morning. Cortisol is a hormone of stress. Cortisol peaks first thing in the morning. So by default, by human animals, we wake up to fear because we don't want to get eaten and we need to have a fucking big day of hunting and gathering. That's genetics, right? So the idea that fear is this dark monster that chases us down the hallway, forget about it. Fear is an ally that makes you feel A, alive, and B, functional in your existence. It's the thing that doesn't make you complacent in a life that will eat you for breakfast. Don't fear fear. Use it to motivate you towards greatness, if I could say it that way.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.